now. But it's been an exciting week for us Malaysians, especially the healthcare workers, because over the last 1 week, quite a number of healthcare workers, especially the private healthcare staffs and everything, have been getting their vaccines on. So it looks like we have gone to another phase in controlling the prevention of this COVID-19. But there are many vaccines available, and their efficacy has been questioned now. Now, how can we know its effect on Malaysian population and the efficacy in the Malaysian population? Now, how can we contribute to this research? We are glad today, with us today, we have Dr. Lim Dek on. Dr. Lim, who is currently a consultant clinical research and medical statistician, was a graduate from University of Glasgow, obtained his MRCP UK and FRCP in Edinburgh, and holds a Master's of Medical Statistics from University of Newcastle, Australia. His last posting in the Ministry of Health was the director of CRC network. During his tenure, the CRC expanded to become a network of 17 branches across the country. Patient registries grew to cover 30 different therapeutic areas, and the industry-sponsored clinical research was given a special emphasis with a dedicated unit to monitor and facilitate clinical trials. Dr. Lim is also an active clinical investigator, published over 50 papers in peer journals, international journals, and many of which are high-impact international journals. He's also a recipient of 2 prominent awards. That is from the honorable mention of the Peter Redstein Prize from the International Journal of Quality in Healthcare in 2002, and the second prize for the Best Research Paper Award from the Singapore Medical Journal in 2004. Dr. Lim also has served as an associate professor at the IMU, the president of the Malaysian Society of Clinical Economics, vice president of the Association of Clinical Research Registries Malaysia, and a subject editor of the Nephrology Journal. Very illustrious career that we had, Dr. Lim. And today, we are very happy that you can spare some moments with us. And the topic is how the general practitioners can get involved in research, on the clinical research of the COVID-19 vaccine. Before that, Dr. Lim, I believe you got your vaccine yourself the last few days.
Yep.
How are you feeling now?
I'm great. I'm feeling good. Everyone get your vaccine, please, soon.
Yeah, I just got mine.
All right.
Well, a little sore at the place, but otherwise I'm doing good. Okay, Dr. Lim, so what do you?
Thank you, Dr. Siva, for those kind words, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Really glad that you could take some time out to listen to me this evening. Obviously, I'm here to try to promote this whole idea of vaccine trials. We'd like to see more GPs being involved in clinical trial, obviously, simply because vaccine obviously involve healthy volunteers from the community, and GPs, I think, are the natural person, the natural doctors to conduct such trials rather than hospital-based specialists. So I'll share my screen with you soon in a moment. Let me get the thingy going. Okay, can you guys see the screen? Dr. Siva, can you confirm you can see the screen, please? Hello? Good, you can see the screen? Hello? Yep.
Can you hear me? Okay.
The screen is good, right?
The screen is good, but is it possible to put it on a slide mode?
On the slide mode, it is on the slide mode, yeah.
Dr. Lim?
Yes, it is on the slide mode, no?
Okay,
let me forward, yep, one back. It is in the slide mode, yes.
But anyway, it's clear, you can carry on.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. I'll proceed. Well, tonight I'll take you through basically two things. Obviously, I have to fill in some background. You need to know something about the vaccine, obviously, before you can sign up for a clinical trial on vaccine. Take you through something on why we need a vaccine now in Malaysia. Some basic vaccinology. The rollout is currently going on, including for myself and Dr. Siva. Both of us survived it. Thank you very much. And of course, some of the emerging issues concerning vaccine that your patients and as well as volunteers who are going to sign up for the vaccine trial may ask you about safety, efficacy, ADE, obviously, and variants, the emerging variants. So I'll cover some of those basic issues very quickly. Then I'll proceed on to the clinical trials on vaccine. What are they? How do we go about measuring a vaccine efficacy? You heard about Pfizer vaccine, 95% efficacious and all that. How do they measure all that? Obviously, a few words about trial design. There are some intricate issues about how to design trial, especially for late coming trial like what we are having now. Yeah, these are not front running vaccine like Pfizer, which started this trial in April last year. These are trials just coming into phase 3 trial now. So there are some complicated, there are some difficult trial design issues. Finally, obviously, the one you are here to listen to, why I think you should sign up for this clinical trial. I think it's a great idea to sign up for the trials. And I'll go through some of the questions you may have. And what are some of the potential benefits for you and for your patients, obviously. Okay, now, let me move on. You guys have seen this probably every day. You see the statistics. So we are glad that we are now over the graph. We are now over this curve. MCO2 works. Obviously, it works well. MCO and any kind of lockdown will work given enough time. And now the government is in the midst of trying to lift MCO2. The big question I think behind everybody's mind is going to be. Yes, sorry.
There's a request to put it at a full screen.
Put it at full screen, huh? So let me see, how do I do that? How do I? Let me see. Could you get the IT to help? How do I convert this to a full screen? It's a full screen on my computer, but the audience is not seeing a full screen, right? Could you help? Could the IT help, Dr. Siva?
We are getting.
I have sent you a copy of the slides. If you want, you could control from your end.
Okay. We can carry on now, please.
Okay. So you are. I'm just going to say next, and you.
Yeah. When you say next, my IT will help you.
Okay. Great. Fantastic. Sorry about that, you guys. Okay. Next, please. Okay. So I've done this. Okay. Next, please. All right, you guys have said this. So to avoid MCO3, obviously we need to do two things. We need to basically get the mass vaccination going. It's ongoing now. And the second thing we really need to do is mass screening. But that's a subject for another day. In fact, I wrote something in the Code Blue a couple of days ago, and so there's some details there. You guys may want to read up about mass screening. In fact, many GPs are already conducting screening at factories and workplaces. So these are some of the ideas that you guys may want to pick up on how to get more employers to sign up for mass screening. But today we're going to talk about vaccination and especially vaccine trial. Next, please. Okay, these are the front-running vaccines. Pfizer vaccine is here. I had mine. Dr. Siva had his. There are, I think, Sinovac is coming soon, and probably quite a few other vaccines will be coming to Malaysia. Next, please. And many of you will be receiving this vaccine. This is a rollout plan. We intend to vaccinate 23.6 million people by probably at the end of the year. That's 73% of the population. Probably enough to achieve herd immunity. So it's a very ambitious plan. And we hope that the government will be able to pull it through successfully. And I hope that we would like to see more GPs and more private hospitals, I think, involved in this vaccine rollout plan. I don't think the government alone could do this, could really pull this on its own. So you guys, most of us, all of us really have to do our part to get the vaccine rollout plan going in this country. Next, please. Now, in fact, people have done work, and I can share with you some data here that really, if you could get your population covered with the vaccine ASAP, you could save a lot more lives and a lot of money. So we are really on a really urgent trip here in getting most Malaysian, or at least 75% of Malaysians, vaccinated by end of the year. So all please help out. Next, please. A few words about vaccinology, because some of the vaccines coming to trial in Malaysia, of course, comes from different types of vaccines, and so you need to know a bit about some of the vaccinology, some of the science behind the vaccine. There are 7 vaccine platforms, but only 5 are used for COVID-19 vaccines, and these are the 5 highlighted one. You heard about all the inactivated whole virus, particularly the 3 virus, the three vaccine from China, Sinopharm, Sinovac, as well as one from India, the vaccine from Biopharma. Then there is a protein subunit vaccine. Probably the most famous of that is the Novavax. And you notice that for these 2 vaccines, there have been many licensed vaccines. So these are the old vaccines. They have been around for years, and so obviously they also use the technology is also used to produce COVID-19 vaccine. Then there's a virus particle vaccine, but no COVID-19 vaccine currently uses this method. The last 2, the viral vector vaccine and the nucleic acid vaccine, in particular mRNA vaccine, these are the 2 newish vaccine. You heard a lot about it. The one in Malaysia currently being rolled out, obviously, is a Pfizer vaccine, and that is an mRNA vaccine. They are new. No mRNA vaccine has ever been used on human. There has been 1 vaccine used on human for viral vector vaccine, and that is the Ebola vaccine. Again, that's pretty newish. It's only used in Africa currently. So these are the vaccine technology currently available, and these are now being used, deployed to manufacture vaccine. Next, please. I'll quickly take you through some of the product characteristics. I'm not going to belabor too much on this. So we have basically 4 main varieties there, 4 main types there. mRNA as represented by Pfizer. We have the vector vaccine, particularly the AstraZeneca. You heard much about it lately concerning its potential, or the possibility is associated with blood clots. That's a chimpanzee adenovirus vector vaccine. Then, of course, there is the protein subunit vaccine. Classically, flu vaccine is made from protein subunit. And here we have Novavax, we have Clover, and others. And then lastly, of course, the inactivated virus vaccine. We have 2 from China and 1 from India, the bottom vaccines. So these are the 4. The 2 on the right are old technology. They've been around for a long time. Many vaccines have been produced using these technologies. The 2 on the left, the mRNA and the vector, are very new. But being new, of course, being new technology, there's actually a lot of very significant advantages for this vaccine. They are highly scalable. They induces both both humoral as well as cellular responses. And in fact, as you have seen with Pfizer vaccine, they have very high efficacy. 95% efficacy is practically unheard of for a vaccine, and one from a new technology for that matter. So that's really exciting science and exciting new technology. And personally, I'm glad that that Pfizer could, the world companies could get this vaccine out so quickly, and in particular, the mRNA vaccine being the first to come out and being approved for wider use. Next, please. So the next slide summarizes. Next, please. The next slide summarizes the dosing. Well, most of them are 2 doses, except for the J&J and the CanSino, a single-dose vaccine. The route, almost all of them now over IM route. So I had my intramuscular injection. Dr. Siva had his yesterday as well. Cold chain is a requirement, but then increasingly, in fact, all these vaccines are now being modified in such a way that they can all more or less be stored and be shipped at standard cold chain temperature of 2 to 8 degrees centigrade. Efficacy was perhaps the amazing part of the story here, the fact that this vaccine achieves such high efficacy. But the concern now obviously is going to be, are they going to be as efficacious against the emerging variants? I'll tell you more about that. You notice that the other two vaccines, the protein vaccine as well as the virus vaccine, generally they will have lower efficacy. In fact, they have lower immunogenicity from phase 1-2 trial. And that's not surprising because we know that this vaccine by and large are not that immunogenic. And most of us were very surprised that the new vaccine based on mRNA and based on bacteria are so immunogenic. And of course, that translates into very high clinical efficacy. Safety, by and large, I think the safety track record has been pretty good. Millions of people have now been vaccinated. We are not seeing anything dramatic yet. Next, please. So that's the clinical trial that we need, with the results that many of us are familiar with. And of course, now the millions, in fact, many millions now have been vaccinated. So we're beginning to see the real world data, how the vaccine perform in real world on wider populations and not just clinical trial subjects. And this is data from US on the Pfizer vaccine. Millions of people have been vaccinated there, and look at that profile. So obviously, being a very immunogenic vaccine, it causes, in fact, a lot of reactogenic effects. You get swelling. I'm having a swelling now on my right arm as well. Of course, you get fever, especially after the second dose. The red bar represents the reactions after the second dose, the blue bar being the first dose. That is expected, and they are high. Okay, so you must expect by and large to experience this kind of reactions. What you don't want to see, obviously, is anaphylaxis. And yes, it has been reported, obviously, that the two vaccines, both the vector vaccine and mRNA vaccines, they are associated with a higher rate of anaphylactic reactions. Even then, it's still extremely rare. It's still talking about something like 3 to 4 per million population vaccinated that will have anaphylactic reactions. So the kind of risk that personally I will have no problem with. No, I'm sure you guys probably will have no problem with as well. Next, please. As for efficacy, well, we have this data from Israel, and in fact, the data from Scotland just came out, I think, a couple of days ago, and basically, the real-world data confirmed that this vaccine were as good as advertised, as the result published in the phase 3 clinical trial for both the Pfizer mRNA vaccine as well as for AstraZeneca's viral vector vaccine. So I think that's reassuring, right? Results that we see in clinical trial are being reproduced in the real world when the wider populations are being injected. Next, please. So what about side effects so far? Beside the March field anaphylaxis that we saw in the beginning, in the first few months when this was rolled out, and I think that the fear of that is much reduced now. We know how to deal with it. We know it's not going to be. Well, it's not. The goals, the benchmark rate is 1 per million, which is the anaphylaxis you observe with flu vaccine. We are now observing something like 3 to 4 per million for mRNA vaccine, the Pfizer mRNA vaccine. So I think that's acceptable. Okay, 3 to 4 times higher, but nevertheless, it's extremely very low absolute risk of anaphylaxis. The one adverse effect that many of us feared many months ago, if you probably remember when the vaccine was under development last year, was of course ADE, right? Antibody-dependent enhancement. That was a thing that we knew very well about in Malaysia because dengue vaccine trial was done in Malaysia, and we subsequently had a long debate and long discussion with the company about whether to introduce dengue vaccine in Malaysia. And of all the countries in Southeast Asia, I mean, Singapore held back, we held back. Of all the countries in Southeast Asia, Philippines was the first one to rush ahead and do it. And of course, they introduced the Sanofi's dengue vaccine, and lo and behold, they injected probably millions of kids with that vaccine, and they start observing, well, they pay the price in terms of ADE. ADE, if you guys will remember, are basically adverse reaction caused by the vaccine inducing a non-neutralizing antibody. The whole idea of a vaccine is to introduce a protein antigen into our body, and that antigen is supposed to induce a neutralizing antibody response, typically many folds above your baseline level. And that neutralizing antibody is meant to eliminate or meant to neutralize the virus, and therefore the virus cannot infect the cells, and therefore you don't get the infection. That's the idea, right? But vaccine can, and they do induce so-called non-neutralizing antibodies. So you have all this massive amount of antibodies circulating in your body. They can't neutralize the virus. So when the subject is infected, what happened? The neutralizing antibody and the non-neutralizing antibodies could do two things. One is what's called a Trojan horse effect or Trojan horse pathways. It enables the virus now to infect cells that are not even supposed to be able to infect in the first place, basically through the mechanism created by the non-neutralizing antibodies. The second way, obviously, is all these antibodies start reacting with the virus particle and form immune complexes. That's basically the basis. In fact, the Trojan horse pathway is the classical ADE pathway, and that's the one that was observed in dengue virus or dengue vaccine. So there you are. All of us talk about it. I will say, will this virus, will the COVID-19 vaccine cause a similar ADE? In fact, since last year, no scientists actually believe it will happen. The expectation is that ADE should not happen to a COVID-19 vaccine. And we are glad that the experience has shown to date that we are not observing. Millions of people have now been vaccinated. We have not observed any acute event. ADE, by the way, is an acute event. So by now, with millions of people having been injected with the COVID-19 vaccine, we should be observing a lot of ADE by now. Loads of people should be hospitalized now because of ADE. We're not observing that to date. So thank God for that. So that, I think, is history now. It's not an issue. It might potentially become an issue with the inactivated virus vaccine. Remember, the vaccines are now being rolled out in US, UK, and many places are basically either the mRNA or the viral vector vaccine. We're not seeing a massive rollout yet, right? For the inactivated virus vaccine. Okay, that's being rolled out in Indonesia, in some countries in South America, but not on the scale of millions and millions of people being injected yet. So we don't know. We don't know yet. Obviously, I'm sure the scientists and everybody is observing that data, is observing carefully, and hopefully we'll have data to prove that, to show that perhaps ADE is not an issue with the other virus, the other vaccine as well. So I'm not going to say any more about that. Next, please. The biggest issue, I think, that all of us are very concerned about is the emerging variants. Will the vaccine work against the variants? And that will be a question some of the volunteers who sign up for your trial, I mean, if you sign up for this trial, may ask you, will this vaccine work against variant by the end of the year? So that's a phylogenetic tree. Some of you might have seen it. The virus, since from the first one that's sequenced in Wuhan, it has evolved. And as you know, coronavirus do evolve very rapidly in human populations. And the one that we are very concerned with is this. The one from South Africa is now called a B1351 variant. Well, there's one in California as well. And then there's a P1 here from Brazil. They all share the same mutations. And that mutation is called the E484k mutations. Basically, a single nucleotide, the glycine being replaced by adenine in a sequence in the spike, a sequence of the spike protein of that virus. I'll show you the blow-up picture on that. Next screen, please. Next slide, please. So there you are. That's the famous picture of the E484k mutations. The green thing that you can observe on the top, the whole thing that is seen on the picture there is a spike protein. And spike protein has various parts of the subunit 1 and subunit 2. And right at the top there is a region, the green area is called the RBD, the receptor binding domain. That's exactly why the E484k mutation occurred. And therefore, that results in tighter, well, that basically results in a region of the spike protein that's no longer neutralizable now by antibodies, or at least it's no longer induced. The neutralizing antibodies induced by the vaccine no longer act against that very effectively, and therefore the vaccine is not going to work. And that is beginning to be shown now from laboratory data, as well as one or two trials from South Africa. Next, please. I can share with you that data. Next, please. So that's the graph. That's a famous graph. On the y-axis there is IC50, basically the 50% maximal inhibitory concentrations for the neutralizing antibody. And once that drop below 50, that's it. The vaccine doesn't work anymore, right? So as you can see, when you're vaccinated, elderly will have a less immunogenic response, and therefore they have a lower IC50. And then the B117 from Kent, UK, again, a reduction in IC50. And then you see the E484k. That's now almost, the current vaccine we have now is just marginally effective now against that particular mutation, or against virus with that particular mutations. And this, I think the trend will be that quite likely fully resistant, I shouldn't use the word resistant, immune escape. I mean, virus variants that will escape the vaccine will eventually emerge. By then, okay, the companies are now working on a booster, third dose booster, and I think many of us will eventually be, well, perhaps quite likely will all require the booster dose, basically to counter against the variants, perhaps by the end of the year or next year. Next, please. So that's it. So much for the background information that you need to understand about vaccine. Before now we move on to vaccine clinical trial, I'll take you through how do we go about measuring vaccine efficacy. That will be the clinical trial endpoints. Of course, something about trial design. I'll tell you a few things about some of the vaccine trials coming to Malaysia. And finally, obviously, I'd like to welcome you guys to participate in this trial as investigators. Next, please. Okay, here you are. There are many so-called back-running vaccines, right? There are about 10 vaccines now out there in the market. Pfizer, Astra, Sinovac, CanSino, Bharat, so on and so forth. They are widely used now in many countries, including in Malaysia. But there are many companies, many manufacturers still developing vaccines, and they have gone through the phase 1-2 trials, and now they're just coming to phase 3 trials. These vaccines face huge challenges. Well, how to complete the phase 3 trial is a problem. So they are here now in Malaysia. They want to do the phase 3 trial in Malaysia. How can we help them? Okay. Number 2, obviously, being late market entrants. So, okay, the 8 billion population in the world. So there are plenty of, we need plenty of vaccine supply and worldwide. I'm sure there will still be a role for these companies to supply vaccines for the rest of the population in the world. The big question perhaps is going to be emerging variants. Will these new vaccines, these latecomers, being able to deal with, being able to handle the emerging variants? We don't know yet, because we don't even know yet whether the front-running vaccines will or will not work against the variants. But these will become even bigger issues for these latecomers. So will it succeed is a big problem. Obviously, we want to help the best we can to make them succeed so that we have more supply of vaccine, not just in Malaysia, but worldwide. Next, please. So in phase 1-2 trial, what we measure is something called immunogenicity. So you can do that in healthy volunteers. You don't need to do that on a lot of subjects. You just take a healthy people, you just jab them the vaccine, you measure the antibodies, or you measure the immune response at baseline, and then you measure the immune response several days or several weeks after the injections. And of course, you try various doses, low dose, high dose, you try single dose, double dose, I mean, 2-dose regime. And of course, there'll be 1 arm given placebo for comparisons. Well, there are 2 kinds of immune response. I'm sure, as you remember, for your immunology class, there is something called the neutralizing antibodies, so antibodies that act against the spike region or act against the S2 subunit of the spike protein on the virus, and thereby neutralizing the virus ability to enter the cells. As you know, the virus uses the spike protein that then engages the ACE2 receptors on cells, on the throat lining in the lung cells, and thereby get entry into the cells. So by neutralizing the antibodies prevent the virus from entering the cells and therefore from infecting us. That's how antibody works. But not forgetting, of course, that there is a second immune response. We have a second type of immune response, and that's called a cell-mediated immune response, and largely mediated through T cells. And these are the various tests, interferon gamma, ELISpot, and IL-4 ELISpot tests. And the graphs here show you the responses. This is, I think, taken from one of the vaccine trials. I think it's a J&J vaccine trial. It doesn't matter. It shows that, obviously, when you give them a vaccine, you induce a high neutralizing antibody response. Of course, it also induces a higher cellular T-cell immune response. So that's how we measure. That's how we measure immunogenicity. It's purely a blood test. It's just purely taking blood from the subjects, measuring the immune antibodies and measuring the T-cells response in the blood before the vaccine, after vaccine. That's it. You can show an immunogenic response, a good high neutralizing antibody titer. You pass a phase 2, you're now allowed to progress to phase 3 trials. Okay. Now, of course, you look at safety as well, and nobody should die. They're typically done on a very small number of subjects, so you don't even think about observing much safety adverse events in such small trials. It's primarily looking at immunogenicity. If you're not immunogenic, you should not be tested on a large number of people in the phase 3 trials. So having done that, next, then we come to the phase 3 trials. Now, in the phase 3 trials, we're not interested in looking at the blood anymore. We're not interested in measuring something in the blood anymore, right? Because we are talking about clinical infection that can progress to severe disease and kill people. So we want clinical endpoints. There are 3 measures, yeah. First, of course, that the vaccine must protect vaccinees, people who receive the vaccine, from symptomatic infection. We're not even interested in asymptomatic infection. We want to know that the vaccine protects you from getting a disease, right? Not just an infection that you have to discover from testing. Or better still, it prevents you from getting severe disease. You don't end up in hospital, you don't end up in ICU. That's the first measure. In fact, that's the fundamental and most important measure. The vaccine must protect you from a clinical disease, a clinical infections. The second measure is, of course, that it must, if possible, prevent transmission, right? I mean, you can imagine that you are vaccinated, and now a virus attacked you. The virus can't get into your cells, or it can't get into a lot of cells, and therefore it doesn't cause an infection. But the virus is still there in you, and then you start shedding the virus. So you could still shed the virus and transmit that to other people. So they are by no means mutually exclusive, right? I'm sorry, they're by no means interdependent here. It could prevent you from getting a disease, but it may not necessarily prevent the transmission or prevent you from shedding virus and pass on the virus to another person. Got it? So that's the second endpoint. In fact, sometimes it's referred to as sterilizing immunity, right? Not just a protective immunity. Lastly, obviously, the big question is how long does the protection last? The best data we have now is about 6 months. We hope that perhaps it could go on to 12 months. Ideally, you get lifelong protection like you observe in some of the older, like polio, like smallpox. You get injected once, you get vaccinated once, and you're protected for life. That doesn't look like it's going to happen with COVID-19 vaccine. Protection, I think, will be limited in durations. I'm sure some of you have seen the data coming out now on reinfection. It's more common than we thought. Okay, so these are the 3 basic measures of clinical efficacy, and we will be measuring all 3 measures, all these 3 in our clinical trials. In fact, with primary attention, in fact, on the first one, because on the basis of the first measure of clinical protections, you will get your vaccine approved. In fact, Pfizer vaccine, all the vaccines currently approved, they've all approved on the basis of a single endpoint, which is the first one, which is protecting the vaccinated from symptomatic disease. Okay, and if you can pass that alone, you get your vaccine will be approved for wider use. You don't even have to show 2 and 3 yet, because, well, we have a pandemic, we have an emergency. Government is anxious to approve vaccines so that it can be rolled out quickly. Next, please. So how do we design a phase 3 trial? The gold standard is it has to be randomized, parallel group, placebo control. Classically, 1:1. One guy get placebo, one guy get a vaccine with clinical endpoints, as I mentioned just now. So that's the standard design. That's the classical design. All the earlier trials, Pfizer's trial, Sinovac trial, CanSino trial, they all follow exactly the same design. So based on that design, obviously, only half the subjects will get vaccine. The other half will get a placebo, okay? No vaccine, nothing in it, something in it. And it has been in para, okay? So they are observed concurrently. No, we don't observe one group retrospectively. And they have to be randomized. So you don't get to select, the patient doesn't get to select whether they get the vaccine or they get the placebo. And finally, of course, it has to be double blind. You don't know, the patient or the volunteers don't know whether they're on the vaccine or they're on the placebo. All the vaccine trials that if you were to sign up later on this evening will be based on this same standard design, okay? Obviously, we encourage the sponsor, the manufacturer, to try to tweak the design because you're back runners. You're not the first guy running a trial, a vaccine trial in the world now. You're not Pfizer, you're not CanSino. We like, by and large, to increase the number of people being allocated the vaccine. So we prefer a 2:1 ratio or 3:1 ratio even. You may want to consider blinded crossover, and that will arise. All right. So your patient sign up for a trial, your volunteer sign up for a trial. And then 3 months, 6 months down the road, the government offered him a vaccine. Like, I got my vaccine 2 days ago. Dr. Siva got his yesterday. And then what? So he's going to come back to you and say, hey, look, I'm being offered a vaccine. And I don't even know whether I'm on the vaccine or on the placebo in your trial. So you may have to you will have to consider do a so-called blinded crossover. Basically, we are blind, and then we tell the patient, if you were on the vaccine, then that's it. You should stay on the trial. But if you're not on the vaccine, you're on the placebo, we like to offer you now the vaccine. Follow what I'm saying? So we cross you over from placebo arm to the vaccine. On the other hand, if you want the vaccine, we cross you over from the vaccine arm to the placebo. That's called a blinded crossover design, okay? The trials that you are going to sign up are all still based on clinical endpoints. I think eventually when we have better understanding on the immune correlate of protections, like we have better understanding of T-cell response of the precise, the exact neutralizing antibodies that we could measure, and that correlates perfectly with clinical protection, then you could design a trial based on these so-called surrogate endpoints. Finally, I think a time will come when it will no longer be acceptable to do a clinical trial of vaccine versus placebo anymore. In that case, we will have to consider, new vaccine versus, say, Pfizer's vaccine, right? So an active control arm. So everybody gets a vaccine except that they get different type of vaccine, and then we compare on that basis. That's called a non-inferiority trial. So these are some of the potential design that we can employ in this trial, in the trials that are now coming to Malaysia. Next, please. Okay, so here we are. We have trials now coming, and we have more coming because Malaysia is a nice place, right? Beautiful place, plenty of COVID. Welcome, come and do your trial. Welcome to Malaysia to conduct your trial. But I'm not proud to say that, okay? But that's the reality. Companies, manufacturers now cannot go to US or China or somewhere else to conduct the trials simply because it's no longer feasible to do such trials in those countries. Next, please. So we have 3 now in Malaysia, all 3 interestingly from China. The first one is from Institute of Medical Biology. That trial has started in January. In fact, I think it's more or less completed enrollment, except for elderly subjects. The second and the third one are just starting next month, or at least we hope we'll get the ethics approval, and then they should start by next month or otherwise in May. One is from Beijing, Minghai, Shenzhen, Kangtai. So the first 2 are inactivated virus. The last one from anti-sulfate. That's a protein subunit vaccine. So GPs are welcome. In fact, we basically prefer GPs to sign up for such trials rather than this being a hospital-based trial, right? Because, well, these are healthy volunteers, right? Well, here you are. You can gain some experience in clinical trial. I'm sure it will be a pretty novel experience for some of you. I'm sure many GPs don't have much experience in conducting clinical trials. So if you like some excitement in your life, sign up for the trial, please. Well, you can get experience in some vaccine administrations, in doing some of this vaccine work. And finally, obviously, I'm not trying to motivate you guys on monetary basis, all right? But you can make a little bit of money. So if that's important to you, you might want to consider. Next, please. So that's my number there. Please contact me if you want to do this trial. Next one is this is my last slide. I'm sure you have a lot of burning questions if you're thinking seriously about signing up for this trial. Do you need credentials? Do you need training experience? Yes, you do. Doing clinical trial is not exactly like doing routine clinical work, but we will have credentialed physician trialists to cover you, so not an issue. Will my practice be adequately resourced for trial, right? I mean, you run a GP, you may not have that much resources to be able to support the trial. So not to worry again, the sponsor will provide everything. Nurses, pharmacies, the whole works. All the resources you need to conduct clinical trial will be provided to you. Do remember that these trials are done on volunteers in the community. So we may not necessarily want the volunteers to come to your clinic. In fact, we prefer GPs to go to factories, to go to workplaces, and we conduct a trial in the workplace. All right. So quite like, in fact, almost certainly now, if you sign up for this trial, you will assign an office or a factory somewhere and say, okay, you and the team of nurses and all that, we train you guys how to do this trial. Then you go to the factories and you conduct a trial. You administer the vaccine. Much as what many of you are currently doing. GPs does a lot of COVID-19 testing, and many of you go to workplaces and do the nasopharyngeal swab and you do the testing. You do the same thing, except here we administer the vaccine and conduct a trial. Ask them about adverse effects and follow up subjects. It's very short. It's only about 3 months, 6 visits. That's it. Okay. Storage and distribution, obviously, all this has to be under cold chain. So there is a specialist pharma company, the logistic company that will handle all this for you. So you are supported there on this. What about anaphylaxis? So obviously you have to manage that. You'll be fully equipped to manage any acute medical emergencies occurring in the factory or in the workplace. What about liability? Sure, there will be an insurance cover for you. If the insurance cover runs in millions of US dollars, I don't even know exactly. I'm sure you're going to look into that. They're going to show you the insurance cover later. How many subjects? Well, we like you to take at least 100, 200 subjects. All right, from perhaps 1 to 2 workplaces. So you'll cover 1 or 2 factories or 1 or 2 offices, and then your job is to go there and visit them and conduct a trial for about 100, 200 subjects. How long is a trial? Well, I think you probably have to spend about 3 to 5 months, perhaps a couple of days a week. That's all. Okay. Each subject will you're only going to visit the subject about 6 times. In fact, 6 times. Screening, first dose, follow-up. First follow-up, second dose, follow-up again, 1 more follow-up, finish. 6 visits. Really straightforward. Yes, of course you'll be paid. You paid about $100, depending on number of subjects you enroll on. Okay, so it's not big sum, but on the other end, it's not chicken feed sum as well. Okay, that's all the question I have. I mean, that I prepared. I'm sure you may have more questions. If you're interested, please sign up for this. Okay, thank you very much. Glad to take your question now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lim, for bringing us through the trial of vaccine trial to be carried out in Malaysia. I'd like to ask the first question. One of the questions that were raised in the Facebook the last few days when I put a notice about today's webinar is all these trials are approved by Ministry of Health or allowed to be tried in Malaysia?
Yeah. We are basically conducting experiment on human subjects, so we don't fool around with that very serious offense for doing experiment on human subjects without ethics approval, number 1, and number 2, there's a separate approval issued. The ethics approval is issued by the Ministry of Health or otherwise by the ethics committee of the universities. And number 2, you need a second approval from MPRA because the MPRA issue an import license, a so-called clinical trial import license, to allow us to import the vaccine, in this case from China, to conduct the clinical trial in Malaysia. So they have to be approved by several authorities.
Thank you so much. I'd like to inform all the participants out there, if you have any questions, please put your question in the chat box. You may raise your hands if you want to ask the question, then we shall allow. So, right? Okay, lots of people are interested to get your contact numbers. So that means your response is good today.
Thank you.
Okay, you say the vaccines trial is going to be 3 to 6 months approximately.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any study about long-term effects of these people that we are vaccinating?
The trial actually lasts longer than the 3 to 6 months that you will be directly involved as a GP, as a doctor involved, as an investigator or as a medical investigator involved in the trial. After the 6th visit, which means the subject has received 2 doses and they have done all the acute visit or the early visits, because as we know, all the acute side effects occur early. After that, the subject receives a phone call or a Zoom call like this by a study nurse. So the study nurse conducts a virtual visit to the subjects every 2 weeks for the next 9 months. So the total duration of a trial for each subject is 12 months actually, after the last dose, after the second dose of vaccinations. So the study will only last 12 months, basically, to look at protective efficacy up to 12 months. That's all.
Okay, thank you. There's one question here by Dr. Joseph Lee. Do we need a GCP cert to do this?
Yes, you need to have the credential. The credential here is called GCP, Good Clinical Practice, course that you have to attend and then take an exam and pass the exam. But for GPs, you don't have to worry because you will not be conducting the trial as a principal investigator. You are basically conducting the trial as an assistant investigator to a principal investigator. The principal investigator will be credentialed, will be GCP certified. And of course, before you sign up for the trial and before you start the trial, you undergo a short course, a short training on GCP. You undergo training on how the procedure on how to conduct the trial as well. Okay. And of course, you'll be taking time off work. You'll be compensated for that. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. There's one question from our sister Siti Farida. If we are interested to participate, will we be assigned to a certain workplace, factories, or do we have to make our own arrangement?
It works both ways. Obviously, the sponsor, in fact, will be going out there actively talking to employees and asking them whether they want to do these trials. And one of the talking point actually is because healthy young workers in offices and factories are not going to get their vaccine soon. So signing up for a trial is one way to get early access to a vaccine, even if it's only 50% chance of getting a vaccine, right? So the sponsors actually do go out to employees and ask and do the promotion. And if we found an employer, then we assign them to you, especially if they're near your practice. On the other hand, on your own initiative, obviously, you may be a panel doctor to some employers, to some factories, and you could ask them, you could pass on this opportunity to them and say, hey, I'm signing up for this trials. You want to do this or not? And especially if you're already conducting COVID-19 testing for them. So you could ask them. Yeah.
Thank you. I believe we have another question from Dr. Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
What happens to the placebo group after the trial is over?
Good question. So, by and large, do remember that we don't really know when the trial will end, right? The trial, we don't really know when the trial will end on positive results. If you do remember going back to the Pfizer vaccine trial, because that was the first one that's approved. So the Pfizer trial started in April, and by November, and they enrolled 44,000 people from US, Mexico, and by November, they have their first 100 infections. So they conduct the so-called first interim analysis. And on the basis of first interim analysis, the US FDA approved Pfizer's vaccine. So if we achieve approval, if we achieve approval status, right, during the trial, or even after the trial, then that vaccine now could become available for use. The sponsor will now offer that vaccine to everybody on placebo. The problem usually arises then when we have data to show that it works, but the authority has not yet approved the vaccine. Then the question arises, can you offer the vaccine? Even though you have data, you've got data to show that it works, but it's not approved yet. So how does the sponsor now offer the vaccine to those subjects on placebo? That's usually is a difficult question. We will just have to solve it. We just have to deal with it as it arises, depending on, of course, the data. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Well, another interesting question, Dr.
Mm-hmm.
This is about the money that you put out there.
Yeah, sure, of course.
What do you ask the question? 100k USD or 100k?
No, ringgit, please. We live in Malaysia, please. We can't pay US. The sponsor can't pay US dollar 100k. Yeah.
Okay, the next question came from Sauri Rajan.
Mm-hmm.
The need to continue SOP even after vaccination need to be stressed upon to public. I think this is not a question. She's telling us that though you've been vaccinated, you still have to continue the SOPs that we have.
Uh-huh.
I think that's what she meant. It's not a question.
Okay.
There's two person raising hand here. Shall I allow one of them? Dr. Ling. Dr. Ling, please unmute yourself and ask the question. Dr. Ling?
Okay, hi there.
Hello, Dr. Ling? Dr. Atel, are you here? Dr. Atel, please unmute yourself. We'll allow you in. Dr. Atel? Please unmute yourself, Dr. Atel. Wrongly pressed, Dr. Atel. Okay, wrongly pressed. Okay, Dr. Lim, there's another question from Paul Chan.
Okay.
Currently going to any sites outside our practice area, we will need approval from CCAPs. Do we need to do the same as well when we do conduct the trial in the field?
I suspect that question is untested. I'm sure it has not even crossed CCAP mind about GPs conducting the trial. So I can't answer that question, but I don't see why not anyway. Yeah. GPs are now going everywhere to do COVID-19 testing, right? So I don't see that as a barrier, yeah, to participation.
Okay, there's another good question here. How to avoid this from Dr. Cheng Hao? How to avoid the ethical issue that employers may pressure their employees to participate in the clinical trial? That means the employer pressure the employees to participate in the clinical trial. How?
So before a subject, a volunteer sign up for this trial, we have to go through a process called the informed consent process. All right, and we take that very seriously. We don't just send out a bunch of forms to the HR of the employer and get everyone to sign. No. We will insist that we meet each of them individually. We talk to them. We give them plenty of time to think about it. We will refuse them to sign on the same day. We will tell them you got to go back, talk to your colleagues, to whatever you want. Give yourself 24 hours. Come back the next day and tell me that you want to sign up for this trial. And sign it in front of me. So we take that seriously. There's really not much point in coercing someone. Remember, to some extent, it may say it's ethical. I mean, of course, we like to say it's ethical. But to some extent, sponsors is actually also doing this for a very selfish reason. No sponsor ever wants to have a subject who is coerced into a clinical trial, because coerced subjects are more often than not very likely to drop out from a trial. Remember, you need a volunteer here to commit to about 12 months, right? To stay on the trial. If I don't sense that you're going to commit 12 months to stay in my trial, I'm going to be in trouble, because my trial data is going to be bad, going to be rubbish. The worst thing you can happen is to have very, very high dropout rate. Some of you may have noticed with Novavax trial. Novavax is somewhat late. Novavax is one of those companies with the vaccine that's just newly approved a few weeks ago. They were very late in doing the trials in the US, and they only have a dropout rate of only 2%. So that's pretty good for a late comer. All right, for the first front running trial, they have practically zero dropout rate because everybody wants to be on a trial. Well, it was the only chance for you to get a vaccine, even if it's 50% chance of getting a vaccine. But now, given the fact that vaccine is being rolled out, we are anticipating a high dropout rate. And you coerce people into a clinical trial, you are basically going to ask for trouble of getting people dropping off from a trial. That would be disastrous. It's not a good idea to coerce people into clinical trial.
This is another question of the day. This is about, are there any preliminary safety concerns during the phase 1 and phase 2?
No, zero, of course. By the way, do remember that a phase 3 clinical trial typically costs a sponsor in the region of about 200 million ringgit. Ringgit, okay, not US dollar. So that's a fair amount of that's a fairly large investment. I mean, 200 million ringgit for doing one clinical trial. The trial will have about 30,000 subjects. It's done in about 6 countries all over the world. So if you're going to spend that kind of money, you better be sure that you better be sure that you are likely to pass the phase 3 trial. You fail a phase 3 trial because, number one, the safety signal is bad. There were people suffering. You're observing a lot of adverse events in the phase 1-2 trials, and yet you rush on to go and do a phase 3. That doesn't make sense. And number two, obviously, you better make sure you observe very high immunogenicity in the phase 2. You don't have that, don't spend 200 million on a phase 3 trial, which was exactly what happened at GSK, right? I think GSK and Merck, GSK and Merck both drop out of the phase 3 because they fail to observe good immunogenic response in the phase 2 trials. So very few companies, I mean, it will be very stupid companies to bring a vaccine into a phase 3 when they are not sure it's safe and they're not sure it's immunogenic.
Definitely. The ROI is very important. So definitely.
Of course.
Okay, there's a good question here. Doctor is very concerned. Dr. Henry Bing Leong is very concerned. How much will the volunteers be paid? Will the employers be paid as well?
No, the employers cannot be paid. Obviously not. The employee we have to pay the employees because they do take some time off work. We have to give them small stipends. So they are paid a few $100. Not one go. I mean, they paid each visit they come, they get some money, they pay for their travel or their stipends. So we don't pay big amount to volunteers because otherwise that constitutes a financial inducement to participate in a clinical trial. You can't do that. The ethics committee will not approve it. By the way, the compensation, the amount that we compensate a trial subject has to be approved by the ethics committee. It's not even a secret, right? Yeah.
Do the workers have to be locals or foreign workers for this trial?
We can accept foreign workers provided obviously they can communicate with us in at least in Bahasa Malaysia. Otherwise, I may have a translator, a competent translator present. If we can't find a translator, if the guy cannot speak Bahasa or we don't have a translator, sorry, we cannot accept him because there cannot be proper informed consent then.
Okay. When the trial, this is a question from Dr. Kim Tan. When the trial ends, will the volunteers be informed on whether they have received vaccines or placebo?
Yeah, we have to inform them because they have to give the chance of those on placebo to receive the vaccine, right? And especially if a trial is positive, if found that the vaccine works, and especially if you can get early approval from authority, then the trial sponsor has an obligation to provide everybody on the placebo arm the trial vaccine. FOC, of course.
Okay, Dr. Lee, there's a question here. How, this from Dr. Ahmad Jahidin, how these newer vaccine trials would be different to the already approved vaccine?
How would they be different? Well, of the three trials, of the three vaccines coming to trial in Malaysia, 2 are inactivated virus, right? One is a protein subunit vaccine. There are several inactivated virus vaccine. There are several approved or authorized inactivated virus vaccine out there. Barat, Sinovac, Sinopharm. There are protein subunits vaccine out there, Novavax. So in the sense, if you say, do they represent a new vaccine technology, a new vaccine platform? No, they are old and tried and tested vaccine technology, but they come from a different manufacturer. And do remember, manufacturers have different ways, or they have different processes of how they go about designing and producing the vaccine, right? And therefore, all manufacturers will have to subject their vaccine through the same trial, same clinical trial process. We do not assume that because you use an inactivated virus and other inactivated viruses have worked, so yours must work. We never assume that. You cannot assume that.
It has to go through all the same phases, the 4 phases.
Yeah, correct.
This is for an anonymous here, that if the trial participant decides to take government vaccine when he is suddenly informed that he can take the government vaccine before the finishes the trial, how do you go about it?
So he will have the right, he has a full right to drop out of the trial. In fact, he doesn't even have to give a reason. He said, thank you very much, bye-bye, I'm not in a trial anymore. And nobody can stop him from dropping out of the trial. And the reason perhaps could be that he's not being offered the vaccine somewhere else, and then he just leave the trial and go and receive the vaccine. But by and large, we will encourage the volunteer to inform us that in the event that you offer the vaccine, let us know, all right? Because we have a process in place to deal with that. And that process is called blinded crossover. We could potentially offer you the trial vaccine in the event that you're on the placebo arm, all right? And then in the event that you're on the trial vaccine arm, then we'll have to inform you that, look, you have already had a trial vaccine. Do you want now to go on and take a third vaccine? I mean, a third dose of a different vaccine? So there will be issues like this to discuss. So they should inform us.
Now, question from Dr. Radha from Wilayah Persekutuan. Who is the manufacturers of this vaccine to be trialed? I think you've answered, put in your slides just now.
In the slides,
Yeah. And is the trial approved by the KKM?
Yeah. They have to be approved, otherwise we cannot do a trial.
Yes. And these vaccines have gone through the phase 1 and phase 2 trial, I believe. Yeah?
Yes. In fact, they have to have been through phase 1 or 2 before we can get approval for them to do a phase 3 in Malaysia.
Okay. Okay. There's a question from Dr. Benjamin George. Do animal trials have been done in all trials and in all trials and vaccines as well?
Oh yeah, of course. Before the manufacturers is allowed to do a phase 1 or 2, which means to use the vaccine on human, they have to justify that this vaccine is likely to work. And the way they justify it is by doing it on animals. All vaccines, regardless of the vaccine type or vaccine platform, must first be tested on animals, okay, before they can be tested on human.
Okay, we are still waiting for questions to come. Can I ask, Dr. Lee,
Please do.
How many doctors or how many participants are you expecting to participate in this trial?
The trial currently is divided into 2 parts. On the one hand, we have hospitals, private hospitals, university, perhaps even Ministry of Health, but the Ministry of Health hospitals are currently very busy with the ongoing trials. So the hospitals will receive so-called public volunteers. People who call up the call center and say, hey, I saw your advert, I'd like to sign up for a trial. Or everybody who inquire through this channel, they will all be directed to a hospital. And then the second part of the trial, the second arm of the trial, is where we approach employers. We go to the employer and we say, hey, you have workers. We'd like to offer your workers this vaccine, but albeit only half of them will get the vaccine, the other half placebo. So all workplace trials, the trials to be conducted at workplaces, all will be handled by GPs. Okay, so let's say we're going to have about 1,000, 1,500 subjects, maybe all about 15 to 20 workplaces. So it looks like we probably need about 10 GPs or so to help us with these trials. Yeah. Oh, by the way, for now we are only recruiting workplaces in Klang Valley, because these are where all the clusters are happening. I'm sure you guys heard about clusters being workplace related. So we are for now only focused on Klang Valley. So we are only inviting GPs practicing in the Klang Valley, yeah, for this trial. Sorry about that. Okay. Yeah, if you are not from Klang Valley.
So you told the staff that you will need roughly about 10 to 15 GPs to participate in this.
Yeah.
Well, we have about almost 200 just now who are listening to you.
I hope so. I do hope some of them will sign up, please.
Yeah, I'm sure it's quite easy to achieve that number.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, this is another question. Can you share any information on these companies?
It's in the slides. These are big companies. They are big research institutes from China. Dr. Siva will be. You guys may freely request a copy of the slides from him. You can write to me, and I'm happy to just WhatsApp to you the copy of the slides. So the names are there. You can just Google it. You will find them all over there.
Okay.
I mean, you'll find more details on Google.
For the interest of the participants who are with us today, this whole talk is being recorded and it will be loaded to our website, the MMA website. So they can just get to the website, log into the website to see this recordings. Okay, we've come to 9:15 now, Dr. Lee. Is there anything else that you'd like to tell us before we end the section?
No, it's been a good session. I really thank you very much for all the questions that you guys have. Really great. Yeah. Now I just look forward to see you guys signing up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Lee, thank you so much for your time. It was a
Thank
very
you.
interesting, enlightening. I think this is the first time talk about how GPs can participate in a trial
Ah,
that
okay.
happened in Malaysia. And we are the pioneer, I believe.
Oh, we have more to come, Dr. Siva. Really glad to work with you on this. All right.
Yeah, no, I guess this will also take the GPs to the next level. So far, we have been just advocating in treating people, but I
Yeah.
guess it soon will be also be adopted to participate in trials soon. Thank you
Yes,
so
please do.
much for our information. We will lift all those who are logged in today. You will get 1 CPD point, and also before we end, we will put the contact number, the email of Dr. Lim. So if you're interested in contacting Dr. Lim, please note the numbers and you can directly get connected to Dr. Lim. Thank you very much again, Dr. Lim. Good night, everybody. Put the slide.